Welcome, everyone. Please give us your attention because today is Earth Day. And John, I want to preface this by saying I'm an environmentalist. And typically what I mean by that is I'm depressed, slightly nihilistic, and I feel somewhat powerless, but I deeply care. And then I read about your organization, WildEarth Guardians, and I ran around the backyard in figure eights, screaming for joy for 25 minutes because the things you are doing are so direct and so inspiring. None of this is BS. I mean that 1,000%. So before we get into one issue or another, I see a wolf is whispering into your ear. Can you give us an idea of the range of issues that you've tackled just in the last 12 months?
You know, part of the reason I've been a guardian as long as I have is because we do tackle a bunch of issues from fire policy to river policy, from wild land issues to wildlife issues, from clean air issues to clean water issues. And
okay, I'll get really specific because the specifics are what freak me out in a positive way. So like, what did you do in New Mexico last year?
Yeah, so we've been working for years to ban traps, snares, and poisons, which sadly have become commonplace. They're tools of kind of the 18th century, and we've been fighting for 15 years to pass a bill that would ban traps, snares, and poisons, at least on all federal public lands. And we won that legislative campaign in the state of New Mexico. And now some 32 million acres of public lands in the state of New Mexico are free of traps and snares and poisons. And that's obviously great news for bobcats and foxes, other wildlife, but sadly, lots of people's companion animals have been caught in traps and been killed by poison. So it's
and what gets me about traps is, you know, I wrote an article about Canada Goose. You know, they're the coats with all the fur and everyone's wearing fur again. Suddenly it's hip again. That comes from, I think, coyotes, I'm pretty sure, who are trapped. And when an animal is trapped, as you can imagine, you can tell us more about this if anything is incorrect, but their paw typically is in a trap. They're stuck there for days. Sometimes they gnaw off their own legs if they're a mom and they need to get back to their children. They're in all kinds of weather, starving, dying of thirst for 3 days, freezing to death until they die.
It's horrific.
Or 2 days, often for days. 1 minute would be a long time.
Yeah. You know, I have on a bookshelf right on the opposite side of my room a steel leg hold trap.
Wow.
These are barbaric kind of.
John, you're not supposed to use those anymore.
Well, the reason that I have it is sadly I came across a bobcat that was caught in a trap and it had died, but it had no doubt suffered for probably days. And you know, these are really barbaric and cruel devices. So we've won in New Mexico. Other states have taken similar action. We're now working in Nevada, and we're pressuring the Biden administration to institute a ban on traps and snares on all federal public lands across the country. And believe it or not, Richard Nixon, of all people, banned two of the most horrific poisons. And sadly, Ronald Reagan lifted that ban. And so we're now trying to, again, pressure the Biden administration to take executive action, issue an executive order to ban those traps, just like Richard Nixon did actually 50 years ago. Wow. So the work continues. The kind of work that Guardians does is on a local and state level, but also on a federal level as well. And so when you win in New Mexico, you feel great. And the next day after celebrating, you figure out where the next struggle is and where the next winnable battle is.
Yeah, and the range of issues. I mean, this is why I got so inspired. It was nice after reading a few of these articles on your website and the article on elephant, we can put those in the links for folks to feel inspired about the environment again. Like, wow, we being you, are actually like able to create concrete change, organic change, loving change. So another issue is like they're trying to put like a 4-lane highway through the middle of a refuge in Utah. Can you mention that one?
Yeah, in southern Utah. It's a beautiful area in the Cedar City, very southwestern corner, designated by Congress, very much like a national park. And sadly, the Trump administration wanted to literally punch a road through this refuge. It was created to protect desert tortoises, which are endangered, and some of the species are listed under the Endangered Species Act. And so we have been fighting to stop that road, and again, pressuring the Biden administration to do an about face on the Trump administration's decision. And again, it's an example of not only that the president plays an important role and which administration is in the White House, but also that citizen voices matter. And I don't mean just citizen voices of a group like Guardians, but one of the critical ways social change happens is when there are enough people rallying to object to a decision or agitate for a different decision. And so critical to our whole approach is getting people to feel that sense of guardianship within themselves and to join other guardians, and feel that, you know, there are reasons to despair, there are reasons to be discouraged, there are lots of reasons to feel hopeful about driving change and creating the kind of world that we want.
And yeah, I can't find the list of things that got me so excited, but you know, some of these are helping, you know, local communities. This isn't a typical like jobs versus, you know, nature. A lot of what you're fighting for is actually helping protect local communities and protect nature both.
Yeah, you know,
like
probably
the water, the rivers, maybe.
Yeah, well, the best example of that comes to mind for me is we've been working for years to protect the communities that are around Greater Chaco. These are Navajo and other indigenous communities, Puebloan communities that have deep and long ties to the Chaco landscape. And for those of our listeners here who don't know, Chaco is a national park. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Mm.
It is a place of deep meaning for native indigenous communities, especially the Pueblos along the Rio Grande, but also the Navajo Nation. There are lots of communities that live there, and they've been besieged by fracking that's threatening to go up to the doorstep of Chaco Canyon National Park. And so we've been working with those communities, not only to protect their sacred region, their homelands, but also to protect wildlife, clean water, public lands that are have intrinsic value in their own right as well. And so that's one of our prime kind of climate justice campaigns, where we're working to bring a halt to fracking, again, in ways that address and protect climate, communities, and clean air.
Yeah, one side note on that, and feel free to disagree, but you know, I get irritated often with myself on the issue of fracking because I'm in Boulder, Colorado. As you probably know, we're kind of a right-wing fantasy of a liberal haven of, you know, Chaco wearing environmentalists, but and we're all anti-fracking, but we're surrounded by thousands and thousands and thousands of fracking wells. It's heartbreaking. We have incredible air pollution from the fracking. Fracking is going right up to schools and farms. I mean, the frackers have no respect for humans, let alone nature. And then they leave, and they often are leaking and they're not cleaned up properly. But all of us, passionate liberals have natural gas heating and ovens or stoves. So it's really important to transition to electric, both in the home, not just in terms of cars, and solar up and all that. We need to all walk our talk and make some change, right?
It's absolutely true. I mean, no one's perfect, and we're all hypocrites to one degree or another when you espouse for deep systemic change.
I mean, to be fair, you don't know me yet, so I could be. You've probably already figured out I'm not perfect, but yeah, okay. Point stand.
All imperfect beings,
Yeah, yeah.
Embrace our imperfection, reflect on our imperfection, recommit to the ideals that we uphold, and deepen our alignment with our values. And that's not easy to do on a personal level. It's not easy to do on a systemic level. And so, we need to make individual choices. We also need to drive systems change so that the ability to tap into a network of clean energy is readily available. Now, communities like Boulder that are more resourced than some of the other Front Range communities that are being besieged by the fracking you noted, clearly have a higher moral imperative because of the articulated value, as you said, and because of the resources available. So
that was a very polite way of saying we're sitting on our privilege, stewing in our self-righteousness, and we need to actually make some change and use our privilege to be a benefit instead of hoarding it.
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. I mean,
you come in here, you tell me I'm a hypocrite, you imply, or no, you directly state I'm not perfect, and now no, I'm kidding.
No. I mean, you're right. There's a question. I mean, we joked beforehand, two white men here, how we use our privilege, whether it's in a gender context, in a cultural or economic context, is a critical question for people in the world who see what is wrong in the world and desire for the world to be different. And I would say this. That's what a guardian is. A guardian is a person who grapples with an ethical responsibility to protect something that is vulnerable. And one of the reasons I joined Guardians back when it was a two-person organization in 1995 is that, and I say this seriously and sincerely, is I loved the name. I absolutely loved the name because it's an evocative name. And the idea of guardianship has been around for centuries. It goes back to the Roman era. And I think most people understand the idea of a guardian is someone who takes care of a child that maybe doesn't have parents for whatever reason. And the idea of a guardian in the sense of our work is someone who likewise knows that there are vulnerable creatures, vulnerable landscapes, and it's our job to stand up and be a voice for those things that are vulnerable. And I love the name, and I think everyone in one form or another knows what it means to be a guardian. We're a guardian of our communities, our families, our friendships. Yeah. And so I think especially on Earth Day, my plea and request is that for everyone to dig deep, reflect on what it means to be a guardian in your life. And if you haven't already, think about how you can expand your personal sense of guardianship to include the natural world and the planet that sustains all of us.
I was going to say, in terms of privilege, there's an intersectional level to it where all of us have privilege in different ways. Obviously, some of us have more in various ways than others. But one way we all have privilege right now, whether we like it or not, whether we asked for it or not, is over every natural species. And so I know one of your many tasks that you're focusing on is relisting the wolf. We humans love to view wolves as scary predators. Same with sharks. As we all know, there's that quote, or many of us have heard that quote, like more people are killed by vending machines falling over every year than sharks. We love to glorify and have fun with our fear in movies around sharks or wolves, Liam Neeson running around wrestling wolves or whatever it is. But the fact is, we're victimizing and murdering wolves and sharks, cutting off their fins, and they drown at the bottom of the ocean, suffocating eventually. Millions a year in terms of sharks. So why should we give a care, especially if we're farmers or ranchers, why should we give a care about wolves?
Well, I think, first of all, I want to say that the fear of these creatures is real, in the sense that it's both real and fabricated. It's real in that primal in the human condition, and deep in the cerebral cortex is that fear has serviced us to help us survive. There have been animals that and that's hardwired. Even as the world in which we live today, there's no reason to fear wolves. Absolutely none.
I mean, now we're obsessed with like, why is the Wi-Fi in my airplane not working? My AC unit is at 70 degrees instead of 69. It's not like wolves are a threat to 99.9% of us.
Yeah, and I just want to note that it's real, so acknowledge that, but I agree with you that we're deeply, deeply disconnected from the natural world, and the things that we grapple with and we think that are challenging are quite insignificant in the grand scheme of things.
But even for Kevin Costner up in Montana pretending to be a cowboy on Yellowstone, wolves are, have you watched Yellowstone?
I have not.
Yeah, so there's a lot of scenes where this wolf is hanging out and they're going to kill it or they're not going to kill it. Wolves want to be left alone. They want to be safe. They want to care about their family. They're not looking for trouble. They're kind of like bees. Like everyone's scared of bees. Bees don't want to sting you. They want to be left alone.
Yeah. It's true of most animals, and even the fiercest and most ferocious of native carnivores truly want to be left alone. I had one glorious morning just north of Yellowstone about a decade ago. I saw 19 grizzly bears, and there were mothers with 3 cubs. There were like lone males. They were all actually.
How far were you?
Oh, only about 100 yards. Wow. We were up on a hill.
Did you have binoculars or something?
Oh yeah, we had binoculars and spotting scopes. Were
the little cubs super cute?
Oh, I mean, all of it was absolutely magical. But I think the reason that I bring it up is that though fear is real, so too is a sense of awe and wonder. And I think the thing that I've learned from, you mentioned ranchers and farmers, is that they too have a sense of awe and wonder. There is a culture war, and wolves have become a part of culture war. But when you really break down, when you really kind of dig into an individual connection with a rancher or farmer, beneath that cultural veneer of wolves being horrible, there is a deeper sense also of wonder and magic in these creatures. And speaking to conflict, there is a real conflict. Wolves eat sheep, wolves eat young cattle. And so
I'm pretty sure humans eat young sheep and cattle too. I've heard about that.
It is true.
We far more.
Well, and speaking, since we referenced or talked about hypocrisy, these ranchers will often talk about their love of these animals. And of course, oftentimes it's 6 to 12 months into their love, they send them off to the feedlot for one purpose, or
in the case of veal or lamb, far sooner.
Yeah. So, part of what we're trying to do, and this is really change the cultural context for how we relate to the natural world. And I think rather than be fearful and threatened, let's invoke awe and wonder. Rather than have a violent relationship with these animals, let's have a compassionate relationship with these animals. And
And we see some, I'm sorry to jump in
Yeah.
with my ignorance, but we see some of this duplicity politically where people are saying, oh, we need to cull, which is a polite word for murder, tens of thousands of wild horses, or at least take them off the land, or both, because they're destroying the nature, they're overgrazing. But then a couple months later, you see tens of thousands of sheep or cows on that exact same land.
Yeah. Well, the biggest threat to biodiversity on the planet is animal agriculture.
So just in terms of hypocrisy or privilege, do you advocate for veganism?
We have
or something similar to that?
I've been a vegetarian for
Yeah.
30 years, but for a little weakness for dairy ice cream, I'm essentially dairy-based ice cream. I'm essentially a vegan. So I think critical personal choice. Organizationally, we have all vegetarian events. So that's been a cornerstone of our work. And
you have vegetarian events like for staff, you mean?
Staff, we'll do events, fundraising events, house parties where we're educating, reaching out to more people to broaden the constituency of guardians. And those events, per our policy, are all vegetarian or vegan. So
are you saying everyone watching this video is invited to a vegetarian party with WildEarth Guardians?
We do one in Denver. We do one in Santa Fe every year. Of course, during the pandemic, we didn't. And so, but
how cool, how fun.
Yeah. So, I think you've got to we're mindful, especially given what I said about animal agriculture being the #1 threat to biodiversity and wildlife.
And to the Amazon, to our, my fiance here is listening, and she is from Ecuador, and the Amazon is getting chopped up every year, not mostly, I believe, for, farming for livestock.
Yeah. If we want to live in greater harmony with the natural world, there is no doubt that our food choices have a critical role in that.
Yeah.
And there are lots of policies and practices that animal agriculture engages in that we're also trying to change on that level. For example, 95% of our public lands in the American West are grazed by livestock. One of the main reasons that wolves are killed, you mentioned this earlier, is some of it is cultural. There's just a culture war, and wolves have become a part of cultural war. But traditionally, the reason and the basis for killing wolves was because wolves eat livestock, cows and sheep. And if you're a rancher, some ranchers will tolerate wolves, but let's face it, if you're a rancher, life is easier without native carnivores. And so
wouldn't it make sense to just create a fund, like if the federal government were to create a fund where every sheep or whatever that was eaten by a wolf, the rancher would get recompensed, or does that exist?
It does exist, but here's what's interesting about it, and we're pursuing it. Since we're into the policy arena a moment, I'll mention this. But what's interesting is that those policies don't change social behavior and the mindsets folks have. And by that, I mean, if you don't like wolves, then whether you get paid or not when a wolf eats your cattle tends not to change your outlook about wolves. So in that sense, we're not instituting a policy which is driving culture change. We're dealing with a critical issue, which is, all right, if you lose a calf, then here's money to replace the value of that calf. One of the policies that we're trying to institute, and it requires federal legislation, is something that would permanently retire a grazing permit on public land. So there wouldn't be the conflict in future years. So that's where, and that drives kind of, instead of just constantly mitigating the conflict between wolves and cows. We're saying, hey, it's on a voluntary basis. If your family decides that you don't want to ranch anymore for whatever reason, conflict, relentlessly causing fatigue, economic or familial reasons, then let's have a tool that allows for you to gracefully, with compensation, kind of exit stage left, and let's use more of our public lands to allow for wolves and other native wildlife to thrive and flourish.
It is a weird thing that, like, here in Boulder, we've bought, tens of thousands of acres of open space, but farmers and others are able to monetize that open space at cents on the dollar, versus private lands. So in effect, taxpayers are paying all the time for wild animals to be murdered, and is strange. I don't think we realize how much is going on our public lands in terms of resource exploitation or wild animal killing.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason that we don't, and I agree with you, is that both these policies are deeply entrenched, and so they're just a part of the way the world runs now. Yeah. And because there are lots of pro-animal agriculture policies, and then you marry that to a cultural issue, which is the myth of the cowboy. I was looking at a book in the bookstore the other day, and it was talking about Black cowboys in LA, and it had nothing to do with what cowboys do, which is raise cows. It had everything to do with the power of the John Wayne myth. You see it in Yellowstone. You reference Yellowstone. I mean, that's built on a mythology and a cultural mythology that resonates with the American identity, and that actually links back to colonialism and manifest destiny, and a part of the American history that has a bunch of dark chapters in it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting mythology. My name's Waylon, a good cowboy name. I grew up riding horses with a bunch of cranky old cowboys whose legs were permanently bowed, and honestly, they were sweethearts, and but it's a weird, especially for young boys growing up. I think we look at the Clint Eastwoods and the John Waynes or whoever it is, and we learn that being a man is being tough and violent and silent, not expressive or communicative. And maybe not asking for consent in relationships. There's a lot of issues around the cowboy myth.
Well, this is what happens when you mythologize a certain way of being. It completely conceals the dark side of that behavior, and normalizes and elevates other kind of. Some of them are positive, but I mean, when I first started and was a little more irreverent, I called myself an iconoclast, because I think part of driving deeper change is grappling with icons that, in my belief, no longer serve us. And by iconoclastic, I mean, I want to smash cultural symbols and icons that are destructive. And I do think in a patriarchal context, in a Western United States context, that there are very few more damaging cultural mythologies than the cowboy mythology to the land, to wildlife, and to relationships. And that is not to say, because I agree with you, that there aren't thousands and thousands of lovely individual ranchers. And, I actually have dealt with dozens and dozens of ranchers over the years, and almost all of them, not all of them, but almost all of them are lovely human beings. But I've dealt with some who, they're lovely, and then they say, we're going to go out and shoot coyotes. Do you want to join us? And so the violence is there,
Yeah.
even as, again, on an individual level, there's lots of kind
Yeah.
cowboys out there in the world.
Yeah. I remember crying, which is not a very, upstanding toxic masculinity trait. I remember crying in the back seat of this car I was driving around with a wannabe cowboy. He was actually like an ex-banker who like made good money and lived like the country gentleman life, but he liked to pretend he was a cowboy. He owned like 40 guns, and he talked about hunting varmints or whatever, groundhogs, for fun. So on that tip, it's like a video game for him basically, and it had nothing to do. He didn't have a farm. He didn't, prairie dogs these are like, they literally have their own language. They're super funny and cute. They love each other, and they love their little kids. And we're wiping them out like all around Boulder. It's like literally a Talking Heads song. It's like a parking lot. We're paving paradise constantly. Right now, Celestial Seasonings, the once hippie tea company, which has been bought and sold a few times by conglomerates, is, I think, selling a big part of their land for housing. And this is probably all of a side issue, but it's setting up advocates for affordable housing versus prairie dogs, which to me is like two groups who should be unified and on the same side, because really they're both getting used by the very rich in Boulder, the big tech money that's moved in, and by developers. We have tons of room downtown along traffic corridors for affordable housing. We just need to actually build it, and the developers never actually build it. So how can you guys are doing work to protect prairie dogs as well, right?
Prairie dogs have been a cornerstone for Guardians for as long as I've been involved in Guardians, which is more than 2 decades. And the reason that we are has to do with two simple things. One, all species are intrinsically valuable, and that's a core belief of WildEarth Guardians. And it's true whether it's a bug or a wolf or a prairie dog. So that is.
I have to just interrupt you briefly. I feel like Renee Zellweger and you're Tom Cruise, and you had me at all sentient, all beings are intrinsically valuable.
Yeah,
So
well, when you ask people about this, most people agree with that statement. And I asked a former Interior Secretary, Bruce Babbitt, who did a roadshow about the Endangered Species Act, and I said, what message is the one message? And I was much younger then. I was thinking a scientific thing or a legal thing. And he said, no, it's about ethics and values, and it's about articulating that all species are a part of the web of life and that they have intrinsic value. So that's a cornerstone. But then there's another piece of Guardian's approach to wildlife conservation, which is based on a scientific principle that there are highly interactive species, ecosystem engineers, keystone species. Kind of all of those words are used to describe species that drive change or that uphold whole ecosystems. And prairie dogs are ecosystem engineers. Most people that pay attention to wildlife know about black-footed ferrets. Incredibly cute, nearly pushed to the brink of extinction. A rancher actually found them on his ranch like 30 years ago, and they used those black-footed ferrets to start a breeding program, a captive breeding program. And then since then, they've reintroduced black-footed ferrets. But one of the reasons that ferrets continue to be on the Endangered Species Act list and to struggle for survival is that they are entirely dependent on prairie dogs. They eat prairie dogs. And so you can't restore ferrets without restoring large prairie dog colonies. And you can't restore a lot of species without protecting the prairie dog ecosystem, because they support just a whole suite of species, including burrowing owls, rattlesnakes live in them, ferruginous hawks. There's just what's that?
Gnomes, obviously. Little people. Yeah. No, and eagles, I believe, like locally in Boulder, we've had photos. We actually had, it was like a photo of the year nationally,
Yeah,
is the eagle being freaked out or scared by a prairie dog coming out of its hole.
yeah.
So many species depend on them. And is it true about eagles that they
Oh,
eat?
sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Eagles will eat prairie dogs. So I'm imagining it might have been a golden eagle, but it could have been a ferruginous hawk or a red-tailed hawk. And this is where you mentioned their language. What's really cool about their language is there's a professor from Northern Arizona University. His name's Kon Slobodchikov. Say that one 100 times.
Hans Labachkov. I got one.
Anyways, he actually is the person who learned about prairie dog language. And what he learned is that the dialects of prairie dogs in Santa Fe are different than the dialects in Flagstaff and Boulder.
Right.
So, and the way that he did this was, of course, through complex recordings and trying to understand their language, but he would have a person appear on the scene in a red shirt and a person appear on the scene in a yellow shirt. And then he would record those again at a colony in Flagstaff and a colony in Santa Fe and a colony in Boulder, and be able to detect the similarity in language and then the dialect in language. And the reason that I thought of it is because, prairie dogs also communicate when there are predators in the area. Golden eagle, ferruginous hawk, like really incredibly sophisticated ways of communicating. I think what's critical about this is for the longest time, the scientific establishment denied that animals had language.
Yeah.
Because to recognize language would be to have to grapple with sentience. And if we grappled with sentience, we would have to really think about our relationship to animals. And so there's still plenty of scientists who deny that animals can communicate because—
No, I remember I read an article about this fellow, whatever his name. Yeah, thank you. And I think I actually wrote an article about it on Elephant, if we want to put that link in, because it has a video of his work and link to the article in New York Times or New Yorker. But like, yeah, the prairie dogs would have a different word. Like if I was on a bicycle versus if I was walking versus if I changed my shirt, it would change slightly because they're keeping an eye out. And and it's so silly because I keep looking at this wolf that is, by the way, it's creeping up on you slowly. And it looks so much like a beautiful husky dog. And, people are so in love with their dogs, and it's a billion dollar industry where, of course, my dog is old and was nearly dying yesterday. He's having some issues. And I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments flooding in from people who love Redford, my old hound dog. He's had serious heart issues. And it's like, probably 99% of these people eat meat. And if you have ever hung out with a cow, they're like big puppy dogs. And, wolves are just like the OG dog. And no one would debate the sentience of Redford or his character or of your dog, your beloved dog or cat at home, let alone our goldfish or whatever. So, it's a very convenient, our definition of what animals matter is very convenient to our own needs.
It's true. Here's what I would say, and it's a reason why I stay hopeful and optimistic and energized. Attitudes are changing, and attitudes are changing fairly rapidly, in part because fewer and fewer people are involved in animal agriculture. Some of that is bad in terms of industrialization of the animal agricultural process. But the upside of this is that human attitudes towards wildlife are moving more and more to one in which people want to treat animals, wild animals, not domestic animals, because we already have a fairly good relationship to our domestic animals on a broader scale. But more and more people want us to figure out at a systemic level, at a policy level, at a legal level, how to treat wild animals with more compassion, and to continue to recognize that these are intrinsically valuable and that we want to figure out how to coexist. So while there is this war on wildlife, there is also a deeper yearning for humanity to figure out how we coexist with wildlife.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. I love that you touched on that, because I got so inspired reading about WildEarth Guardians in a visceral way. I was inspired, but typically, you know, I'm sort of depressed or defeated when I think about our environment. You know, we read about the extinction of thousands upon thousands of species every year, and climate crisis. You know, we had 1,000 homes burned down in the middle of December here in near Boulder. And
Yeah.
so how do you and your staff and those who support your work stay inspired? Is it just inspiring being close to the fight, the good fight, or is it a battle to just keep going, or is it easy and fun? Not easy, but you know, like, it seems really inspiring when you read about it.
Yeah, you know, you have to celebrate the struggle, because when I reflect on the first thing you asked me about, the trap ban victory and banning of poisons and traps and snares in New Mexico, that took about 15 years. So you have to celebrate the struggle.
Yeah.
You have to celebrate the people that you are engaged in the struggle with. And you really also have to, I mean, like anything in life, you have to take care of yourself. There are moments of darkness, don't get me wrong. Obviously, when Trump was elected, a lot of despair, a lot of fear and anxiety, given what's going on in the world today, all of the issues, the economic inequity, the systemic racism, the social disruption around all of this. I mean, you look at all the trends. I'm a bit of a sports guy, and seeing like high school pitcher hits a guy who, you know, just the violence and the normal.
Or are you talking about the dude who tackled the guy who hit the home run?
Yeah, the tackled, and then there was another one where at a AA level, that was in college, this guy, there was a brawl on the baseball field and in AA, the Mets against someone. And you just look at the normalizing of violence in all of its manifestations, not just the most horrific, the gun violence that so many communities, including Boulder, have experienced, but the little manifestations, the impatience, the impatience we feel with one another. Obviously, the rising autocracies, and all of just, there's violence in the world. And so, and there are reasons to despair. And so you can't change everything. So you can't believe that you can. And you have to believe that in your cause, you have to believe in the people that you're working with. And for me, it's always been about actually vision and possibility.
Yeah.
Even as I've grown older in the movement, I've been doing this for almost 35 years, devoted my lifetime to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you for that gratitude. You know, I tell people also that I have a blessing and a curse, which is my optimism. I'm sort of born with it.
Yeah.
So you have to believe in possibility and in your hopes and dreams. If you don't, cynicism doesn't drive change. I understand cynicism, but you can't be cynical and drive deeper change in the world.
Yeah, I've written a lot about nihilism. I feel like it's kind of a cop-out. It's very convenient. Like, you can look at all the hard news and depression and bad trends, but you can also say, well, if I can make any difference to anyone, like again with Redford, if you can benefit one being, that's the whole world of difference to that being. So
yeah,
why not do something, whether it's macro or micro, or ideally both? Like, your organization's seemingly doing a lot of both. So specifically for Elevin, you know, we want to share this on all our platforms and social media. How can we, if we find this engaging both on a macro and micro level and inspiring, how can we be of service to you guys? How can we help be a guardian?
Well, I mean, there are two things. One is we've got an action alert that we're focusing our membership on, which is about wolves, trying to pressure the Interior Secretary, Deb Haaland. We're thrilled that President Biden made her the Interior Secretary. She's the first Indigenous person in that position, first Indigenous person to be a member of a president's cabinet. So a lot of really significant milestones in her nomination and her representation now as the Interior Secretary. And she's in a difficult position with lots of political pressure from Western governors and others who don't want to see wolves protected. And so what we need are more people to pressure her because core to our approach to change is strength in numbers. So we need more guardians to pressure her. And we'd love to have more guardian supporters too.
Because there's so much pressure on the other side too. So it really helps to advocate for change and for harmony and for peace and for, I remember FDR said, like some activists were yelling at FDR in a meeting and advocating for something. He said, look, I want to do what you want me to do, but you have to make me do it.
Exactly.
Like, that's how politics works. They have to have an excuse to say, well, look, the public really cares about this. We need to find a way forward that will make everybody at least somewhat happy.
Yeah. And there are powerful, as you noted, powerful forces on the other side of every issue.
Yeah.
And people in power do not easily concede their power. It is just a reality of the human condition. And so more people, more guardians, more supporters, more pressure on Deb Haaland. So, our two asks of the audience are to engage with our action alert, to pressure Deb Haaland, sign that petition, urging her to relist wolves and to ensure that the killing and poisoning, snaring, trapping of wolves in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, where it has continued to happen, that comes to an end. And then likewise and separately, we'd love to have people become a Guardians member at whatever financial level, or even critically to join our email activist network, which is about 100,000 people. And we reach out to that network of people and call on them on critical issues, whether it's at the outset, we talked about the trapping issue. We talked about the Red Cliffs National Conservation Area in southwestern Utah. We're also working on bringing an end to fracking on public lands, and we've had some setbacks there because President Biden had issued a moratorium on new leasing of federal public lands, and then a week ago today undid that moratorium, and we're now making the climate problem worse by continuing to allow for more leasing of federal public land. So Guardians is on the front lines fighting that decision in court and the individual decisions that will flow from it, whether they're in the Front Range of Colorado worsening the pollution problem that is there, or in Wyoming, Montana, or New Mexico, where I live.
Yeah. Why do you think he undid the moratorium?
I think that the global context around Ukraine probably is one factor.
The pressure around fuel prices.
Yeah, fuel
prices. Fracking won't address that. New fracking, new leases wouldn't address that for many years.
It's optics. I also think that the Democrats in the West, the elected Democrats in the West, whether in the U.S. Senate or are in the governor's houses, we haven't put enough pressure on them to demand particular policy changes like this one. It's completely reasonable. I'll just say this point. The oil and gas companies will put as many leases on their books as possible. It just fattens their balance sheet and their bottom line. So as long as we let them dictate policy, we're going to continue to worsen the problem. And so nothing difficult happens easily. Nothing difficult happens without a good bit of courage. And Biden caved to the political pressure of both Western Democrats and Republicans in deciding not to keep that moratorium in place. It's
and too often I feel like those moments are an excuse for cynicism, where people say, "Oh, Biden, he's evil." But really, it's like we're all putting pressure on Democrats. Are scared to death of the midterms and losing their majorities. And right now with voting rights, they lose the midterms, like there may never be another Democratic majority ever. We may fall into autocracy here in the US, not really a working democracy. And so yeah, Democrats are always a little bit chicken around these issues because there's so much pressure and fear and hype around fuel prices, gas prices, which are historically low in the US versus other countries.
Yeah. Well, you've touched on all the issues. These are complex political, policy, cultural issues. They're deeply, you don't solve them easily. And that's why, when Biden came into office, in his first week, he issued a series of executive orders. One of those executive orders came out on January 27th. And one of the phrases that he used most frequently throughout that executive order was that we needed to, quote, raise our climate ambition in order to deal with the severity of the problem. And in that executive order, it was that executive order in which he called for the Department of Interior to issue a moratorium on making the climate problem worse. And so he said, let's place a moratorium on the further leasing of federal public lands and waters. It's a rational climate decision. It's a critical climate decision. And so to backtrack on that was and is deeply discouraging. And it's our job to, rattle the cages of all kinds of decision makers to say, we need to raise our climate ambition. We need to hold the president accountable to the vision in that original executive order, because without more courage and more ambition, we're not going to solve these challenging problems.
Well, let alone like with Manchin, people are always saying, oh, Manchin's the problem. You're like, well, the problem is that have a 50-50 split and we're dependent on a couple moderates going our way or not. Like, get a real majority in there that is Manchin proof. And then moderates have their role. Moderates are key, as we see with Susan Collins and, our newest Supreme Court justice. Like, it's always helpful to have some moderates, but we just need a real majority to push climate change legislation. And none of this should be even partisan. Both parties should be concerned about wildfires and toxic smoke and, all the issues.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Yeah, well, our political system is beautifully imperfect and requires relentless vigilance.
Oh, well said.
That's the work of a guardian too, relentless vigilance about the things that we care about, because as you said, if we don't tend the fires of civility, of citizen-based democracy, there are rising autocracies, and there are reasons that autocracies appeal to the human condition at a deep level. In times of anxiety, in times of fear, we want to be told that things will be okay. We want that. And I don't excuse it, but I think if we don't understand the appeal of a Trump or a Putin, then we fail to engage with people in a way that resonates, and so that we can build a majority for the vision of the world that we yearn for. And it is where I think progressives, it's not all about vision. It is about policy, but vision and the values and the narratives and stories that go with it, that's what the human condition yearns for. And so if we can do that better, we can create this bigger constituency for not only the political outcomes of a Senate that can sort of support bolder climate policy, bolder social policy, bolder voting rights policy, but also just to create a more compassionate and just and beautiful world, you know?
Amen. And I think, you know, beyond more compelling stories or figures, like we saw this with Obama. Like Obama won, everyone was romanced by the idea of Obama, and Obama himself was like, look, people are supporting me often out of some kind of longing and vision, but you know, I'm one person, and you know, people can't just check out as soon as Biden is in office or Obama or whoever. We need to stop looking for like some sort of cult leader to do all the work for us. We have to, like, you're a great example of that, be engaged citizens. And that's really what a democracy is. It's like, we have a ton of power and we're abdicating it every day that we buy into nihilism or cynicism.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is where, again, we got all these groups. I'm thinking about the dissolution of civic institutions, many of which I don't really identify with, but all of which.
Like which ones what are you talking about?
Rotary clubs and
I see.
Things that I'm reflecting on a book and some articles that have talked about the dissolution of institutions that are infrastructure for democracy to work, because they enroll and allow for the participation of citizens. So many of those institutions don't exist. So as I think about the importance of groups like Guardians, part of what we're trying to do is to re-envision and reconstitute some of that, some of those opportunities for civic engagement, so that people believe, like when you win and you create momentum and belief that, oh, we can do this elsewhere. We can create the kind of world we want. And even if it's a long struggle, but if you can't get more people to participate, then that sucks the lifeblood out of democracy and democratic institutions. So it's just a real struggle, especially as you noted about rising autocracies and the appeal that they have as people given to some cynicism and fear about the world, about each other. And those things are on the rise, as you noted, not only in other countries, but here in our country.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the good news is it's all sort of interconnected problems. So if we strengthen democracy, we can strengthen humankind's ability to reverse a human-made climate crisis.
Yeah.
Or at least slow it down.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, thank you so much, John, for your time. And I hope everyone who listens is inspired to join. I know I am. WildEarth Guardians, and we put links both in the article and in the video. Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
Just grateful for the conversation.
Likewise.
And yeah, enjoyed it, and feel like these are critical times in our country and in the world, and you know, little acts of kindness, little acts of engagement can be a tipping point, not only in terms of what they create in the world, the ripples, but even within one's own spirit. Like, so I just encourage
well said.
All the people that are out there to don't give into cynicism, even though the reasons for feeling cynical are aplenty.
Yeah, and often real.
Yeah.
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 Awesome. Well, thank you, John, and thank you to all your team and all the folks who support WildEarth Guardians.
Likewise to you and your team.
Yeah, let's do it again anytime.
Yeah. Okay, Waylon. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.